The distress signal came at 0347 hours, cutting through the silence of space like a scream. Commander Daniel Brooks stood on the bridge of the Earth defense vessel Starbound Hope, watching the message play on repeat. The voice belonged to a woman, her words broken by static and fear. She was begging for help. She was saying that they were everywhere. She was saying that the children were dying. Then the signal went dead. Daniel had served in the fleet for 22 years. He had seen border skirmishes and pirate attacks and diplomatic incidents that almost became wars. But something in that woman's voice made his blood run cold. He ordered the fleet to maximum speed and prayed they would arrive in time. They did not. New Eden had been humanity's proudest achievement. The colony world sat on the edge of explored space, a green and blue jewel that reminded everyone of Earth. Over 2 million people had built their lives there. They had farms and schools and hospitals. They had theaters where children performed plays for their parents. They had parks where old couples walked hand in hand and remembered their youth. When the Starbound Hope emerged from fold space above New Eden, Daniel saw only fire. The Velcari Dominion had come without warning. The insectoid species had always viewed humanity with contempt. They were an old race, proud and cruel, and they believed that younger species existed only to serve or die. For decades, human diplomats had tried to build bridges with them. They had signed treaties and trade agreements. They had believed that patience and kindness would eventually win the Velcari over. The Velcari had smiled at human diplomats while there war. Fleets prepared in secret. Lieutenant Commander Amy Hart led the first ground team into the ruins of the capital city. She was 34 years old and had grown up on a colony much like New Eden. She had joined the fleet because she believed in protecting people. She believed that humanity's role in the galaxy was to be a force for good. Walking through those streets changed her forever. The Velcari had not simply attacked New Eden. They had hunted its people like animals. Amy found bodies in homes and schools, in the underground shelters where families had tried to hide. The aliens had used weapons designed to cause maximum suffering. They had taken their time. They had enjoyed it. She found a playground where children's toys lay scattered in the ash. A small teddy bear, burned on one side, stared up at her with button eyes. Amy picked it up and held it against her chest. And for the first time in her adult life, she wept. Admiral Patricia Cole received the footage aboard the Constellation, the flagship of Earth's defense fleet. She was 61 years old and had spent her entire career believing in peace. She had written papers about conflict resolution. She had trained a generation of officers to see war as a failure of imagination. Her daughter had lived on New Eden. Her son-in-law had been a teacher there. Her 2 grandchildren, ages 7 and 4, had been learning to ride bicycles. Patricia watched the footage in silence. She watched the bodies and the ruins and the evidence of systematic slaughter. She watched until the screen went dark, and then she sat alone in her quarters for a very long time. When she emerged, something had changed in her eyes. The United Earth Council convened an emergency session 3 days later. Representatives from every human world gathered in the great chamber, their faces pale with grief and shock. President Marcus Webb stood at the podium, a man who had built his career on optimism and hope. Behind him, photographs of New Eden played on massive screens. Photographs of the dead. Photographs of the destruction. Photographs that would haunt humanity for generations. For 80 years, Marcus began, his voice steady despite everything. We have extended our hand in friendship to every species we encountered. We believed that the universe was vast enough for all of us. We believed that cooperation was stronger than conflict. We believed that if we showed the galaxy our best nature, they would respond with theirs. He paused, looking out at the assembly. We signed the Galactic Accords and limited our military to defensive forces only. We shared our technology freely. We welcomed alien visitors to our worlds and treated them as honored guests. We did everything we could to prove that humanity wanted nothing but peace. The photographs continued to cycle behind him. A child's drawing, half burned. A wedding dress in the rubble. A family portrait. The glass cracked, but the smiling faces still visible. The Velcari watched us do all of this, Marcus continued. They sat across from our diplomats and nodded politely. They signed agreements they never intended to honor. They smiled at us while they planned the murder of 2,300,000 innocent people. His hands gripped the podium. They thought our kindness was weakness. They thought our desire for peace meant we were incapable of war. They thought they could slaughter our children and we would simply accept it. Marcus Webb had never been a military man. He had never raised his voice in anger. He had always believed that calm reason could solve any problem. But when he spoke again, there was something new in his voice. Something cold and hard and ancient. They were wrong. The chamber erupted. Some representatives shouted for immediate war. Others called for calm and diplomatic solutions. A few simply wept, overwhelmed by the horror of what had happened. Admiral Cole stood in the back of the chamber, watching it all. She thought about her grandchildren, about the lives they would never live and the dreams they would never chase. She thought about the teddy bear that Amy Hart had found in the ashes. She thought about a facility buried deep beneath the mountains of Colorado. A facility that officially did not exist. A facility that held weapons humanity had built and then hidden away, hoping they would never be needed. Those weapons had been created by people who understood something that the optimists refused to accept. Peace was wonderful. Cooperation was admirable. But the universe was old and dark and full of species that saw kindness as an invitation to attack. Humanity had prepared for this day while praying it would never come. As the council debated and argued and wept, Patricia Cole slipped out of the chamber. She had calls to make and orders to give. The time for diplomacy was over. The time for grief would come later, when there was nothing left to do. Right now, there was only one thing that mattered. The Velcari had awakened something in humanity. Something that had slept since the species first crawled out of the caves and looked up at the stars with wonder. Something dark and terrible and patient. They had wanted to teach humanity a lesson about power. They were about to learn one instead. The elevator descended for 17 minutes before reaching the bottom. Admiral Patricia Cole stood in silence, watching the depth counter climb higher and higher. 3,000 meters. 4,000. 5,000. The facility had been built during the early days of human expansion, when the first generation of explorers had encountered species that made them realize the universe was not always friendly. Dr. Nathan Price waited for her at the blast doors. He was a thin man with tired eyes and hands that trembled slightly. He had spent 30 years working on weapons he hoped would never be used. Every night, he had gone to sleep praying that humanity would never need what he had created. "Admiral," he said quietly, "I wish we were meeting under different circumstances." "So do I," Patricia replied. "Show me everything." The blast doors opened onto a cavern that stretched for kilometers in every direction. Row after row of sealed containers lined the walls, each one marked with warning symbols in a dozen languages. Automated systems hummed in the darkness, maintaining weapons that had been waiting in silence for decades. Nathan walked her through the facility, his voice flat and professional. He explained each weapon system the way a doctor might explain a terminal diagnosis. These were not tools of war. These were instruments of extinction. "Quantum disruption warheads," he said, gesturing to the first section. "They don't destroy matter. They unmake it. Everything within the blast radius simply ceases to exist at the atomic level. No debris, no radiation. Just nothing." Patricia nodded slowly. How many do we have? 12,000. Each one can eliminate a medium-sized moon. They moved deeper into the facility. Nathan showed her neural cascade bombs designed to turn a species' own nervous system against itself. He showed her plague vectors engineered to target specific genetic markers. He showed her autonomous hunter-killer drones numbered in the millions, each one capable of independent operation for years. We built these because we were afraid, Nathan admitted. The first explorers encountered the Velcari and saw what they did to weaker species. They came home and told the government that we needed insurance, something that would make any species think twice before attacking us. But we never used them, Patricia said. We never had to. The mere possibility that we might have such weapons was enough to deter most threats. And we genuinely hoped we would never face a situation where... He trailed off, unable to finish. Patricia thought about her grandchildren. She thought about the playgrounds of New Eden and the children who would never grow up. She thought about all the years humanity had spent trying to be good and kind and peaceful. Activate everything, she said. Begin full production immediately. Nathan closed his eyes for a moment. Admiral, once we do this, there's no going back. The galaxy will see what we're capable of. They'll never look at us the same way again. Good, Patricia replied. I want them to be afraid. I want every species in this galaxy to understand exactly what happens when you murder our children. Across human space, something remarkable was happening. The news of New Eden had spread to every colony, every station, every ship. And instead of despair, humanity responded with cold, unified fury. Recruitment centers were overwhelmed within hours. Men and women who had never considered military service lined up by the thousands, demanding to be trained. Scientists abandoned peaceful research to offer their skills to the war effort. Factory owners contacted the government, asking what they could produce. Artists created propaganda. Writers penned speeches. Musicians composed anthems of rage and defiance. Captain Greg Palmer had retired from the fleet 5 years earlier, tired of the endless patrols and diplomatic missions that seemed to accomplish nothing. He had bought a small farm on a quiet colony and tried to forget about the stars. When he heard about New Eden, he was back in uniform within 6 hours. The fleet gave him command of the Nightfall, a ship that had been sitting in a classified shipyard for 15 years. On paper, it did not exist. In reality, it was the most advanced warship humanity had ever built. It had been designed for one purpose only: to make enemies of humanity regret their decisions. Greg gathered his crew in the main hangar before their first mission. They were young, most of them, their faces hard with grief and determination. Many had lost family on New Eden. All of them had volunteered for the most dangerous assignment the fleet could offer. The Velcari have studied us for decades, Greg told them. They've analyzed our broadcasts and our diplomatic communications. They think they understand what humanity is. They think we're soft because we chose to be kind. They think we're weak because we preferred negotiation to violence. He walked among them, meeting their eyes one by one. They made a mistake that many species have made throughout history. They confused our restraint for inability. They saw us turn the other cheek and assumed we had no fists. Greg smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. We're going to correct their misunderstanding. We're going to show them what humanity is capable of when we stop being nice. And when we're done, no species in this galaxy will ever again think that attacking our people is a good idea. The crew cheered, a sound that echoed through the hangar like thunder dot in the Galactic Assembly. Representatives of other species watched humanity's mobilization with growing unease. Many had secretly hoped the Velcari would humble the ambitious young race. Humans expanded too quickly, talked too loudly about cooperation and equality. They made older species uncomfortable with their optimism. Now those same species watched in horror as humanity revealed capabilities no one had suspected. The peaceful explorers were building weapons of unimaginable power. The smiling diplomats were becoming cold-eyed warriors. The species that had signed every peace accord and limited its own military was transforming into something terrifying. Ambassador Linda Shaw addressed the assembly one final time before departing for Velcari space. She was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes, the sort of person who had spent her life believing in the power of words. "We tried," she said simply. "For 80 years, we tried to show the galaxy that violence was not the answer. We believed that if we were patient and kind and reasonable, eventually everyone would see the wisdom of peace." She gathered her notes, her movements slow and deliberate. "We were naive. The Velcari taught us that some species only understand one language. So now we're going to speak to them in terms they can comprehend." Linda paused at the door, looking back at the assembled representatives. "I suggest the rest of you take notes. This lesson is for everyone." The awakening had begun. Humanity was no longer sleeping, and the galaxy was about to discover what that meant. The Velcari High Council met in their great chamber, a vast space carved from living crystal that had taken 10,000 years to grow. The Supreme Matriarch sat upon her throne of bone and metal, surrounded by her advisors and war leaders. They had gathered to celebrate their victory over the human colony. But the mood had shifted since the strange message arrived. Ambassador Linda Shaw stood before them, small and fragile among the towering insectoid forms. She wore simple diplomatic robes and carried no weapons. To the Velcari, she looked like prey that had wandered into a nest of predators. "I bring a message from the United Earth Council," Linda said, her voice calm and clear. "You have 72 standard hours to respond." The Supreme Matriarch clicked her mandibles in amusement. Her compound eyes reflected Linda's image 1,000 times over. "Speak your message, little creature. We are curious what demands the humans think they can make." Linda pulled out a small device and read from it carefully. "The United Earth Council offers the Velcari Dominion one opportunity to surrender unconditionally. You will return all human remains for proper burial. You will hand over every individual responsible for planning and executing the attack on New Eden. You will submit to tribunal justice for war crimes against humanity." Laughter rippled through the chamber. The Velcari war leaders clacked their claws together in mockery. Even the advisors, usually solemn and cautious, joined in the derision. "Surrender?" The Supreme Matriarch rose from her throne, her massive form casting shadows across the floor. "You come to our homeworld, to the heart of our empire, and you demand surrender? Your species has fewer than 40 combat vessels. We have thousands. Your military is designed for defense. Ours is designed for conquest." She moved closer to Linda, her mandibles opening to reveal rows of sharp teeth. "We destroyed your colony because you annoyed us. Because your species talks too much about peace and cooperation. Because you needed to learn your place in the galaxy." The matriarch's voice dropped to a hiss. "Return to your people and tell them to prepare for extinction. We will come for your other colonies soon. And when we are finished, humanity will exist only as a memory and a warning to other young species." Linda did not flinch. She did not step back. She simply nodded, as if the matriarch had confirmed something she already knew. "I will relay your response," she said quietly. "For what it's worth, I argued against what comes next. I spent my entire career believing that all species were capable of reason, of mercy. I thought that if we just kept trying, eventually even the Velcari would see the value of peace." She met the matriarch's compound eyes with her own. "I was wrong about your species, but you were also wrong about mine. We didn't limit our weapons because we couldn't build them. We limited them because we were afraid of what we might become if we used them." Linda turned and walked toward the exit. her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. "You've taken that fear away from us." The doors closed behind her, and the Velcari Council erupted in discussion. Some dismissed the humans' words as empty threats. Others, older and more cautious, felt a strange unease. There had been something in the ambassador's voice, something that sounded almost like pity. Far from Velcari space, Commander Victor Lane coordinated the largest military operation in human history. He stood in the command center of the Starward Hope, surrounded by holographic displays, showing the position of every human asset. The hunter-killer drones had been deployed weeks ago, slipping through Velcari space in perfect silence. Millions of them now waited in asteroid fields and gas clouds and the dark spaces between stars. Each one carried a fraction of the terrible weapons humanity had hidden, waiting for the signal to activate. 72 hours, Victor murmured, watching the countdown. More mercy than they deserve. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Karen Torres, stood beside him. She was young, barely 30, but the events of the past weeks had aged her. Her brother had been a doctor on New Eden. "Do you think they'll surrender?" she asked. Victor shook his head slowly. "No, they're too proud, too certain of their superiority. They've conquered 11 species. They think they understand how this works. Then why give them the chance? Because we need to be able to tell ourselves we tried. Because we need to know, when we do what we're about to do, that we gave them every opportunity to avoid it." Victor's voice was heavy with something that might have been sorrow. "We're about to become something we never wanted to be. The least we can do is make sure it was necessary." The Velcari spent the next 72 hours preparing for war. They recalled their fleets from across the Empire. They armed their orbital platforms and activated their planetary shields. They sent messages to their allies, boasting about how they would crush the upstart humans and divide their colonies among themselves. They expected a battle. They expected the humans to come at them with their pitiful fleet and be destroyed. They expected victory. What they got was silence. When the deadline passed, nothing happened. No human ships appeared. No messages came. The Velcari commanders checked their sensors repeatedly, searching for any sign of attack. Perhaps they realized the hopelessness of their situation, the Supreme Matriarch announced. Perhaps they have accepted their fate. But deep in the Velcari communication networks, something was changing. Relays that had functioned for centuries suddenly went dark. Sensor stations stopped responding. Patrol ships sent routine reports and then simply vanished, leaving no trace. Admiral Cole watched from the constellation as the Velcari Empire began to go blind. The hunter-killer drones were doing their work perfectly, cutting the enemy's eyes and ears without revealing themselves. Phase 1 complete, her tactical officer reported. They've lost 60% of their early warning network. Their command structure is fragmenting. Patricia nodded. Begin Phase 2. Send in the Nightfall. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, Captain Greg Palmer received his orders. He looked at his crew, at the young faces that had become hard and determined over the past weeks. "This is it," he said simply. "Remember New Eden. Remember why we're here. And remember that what we do today, we do so that no human child ever dies this way." Again, the Nightfall activated its fold space drive and vanished. It reappeared directly above the Velcari. Homeworld. 800 warships immediately moved to intercept, their weapons charging. The planetary defense grid came online, targeting the single human vessel that had dared to enter their space. Greg Palmer opened a channel that broadcast on every frequency the Velcari used. "This is Captain Palmer of the Earth Defense Vessel. Nightfall," he said calmly. "This is humanity's response to New Eden." The Velcari fleet commander laughed at the lone ship facing his armada. He gave the order to fire, Greg smiled. You believed that slaughtering our civilians would break us. Instead, you have united us. You wanted to teach humanity a lesson about power. The Nightfall's primary weapon began to charge, energy readings climbing to levels the Velcari sensors could barely comprehend. Class dismissed. 6 months had passed since the war ended. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Velcari Dominion existed only in history books now, reduced to a single world struggling to rebuild a society that had been based entirely on military conquest. Their former subject species were establishing their own governments, tentatively exploring freedoms they had not known for thousands of years. And humanity had become something new, something that the rest of the galaxy watched with a mixture of respect and fear. Ambassador Linda Shaw returned to the Galactic Assembly for the first time since delivering the ultimatum to the Velcari. The Great Chamber was full. Representatives from 47 species crowded into their seats. Some had traveled for weeks to be here. No one wanted to miss what the humans would say. Linda walked to the central podium, a small woman in simple robes surrounded by towering aliens who had once looked at her species with contempt. She felt their eyes on her, felt the tension in the air. We did not want this war, she began, her voice clear and steady. I know some of you don't believe that. I know some of you think humanity was always planning to reveal its true nature and dominate the galaxy. But I want to tell you the truth. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives who had secretly hoped for humanity's destruction. We spent 80 years building a civilization based on cooperation and peace. We signed every accord. We shared our technology. We limited our weapons. We genuinely, sincerely believed that the universe was big enough for all of us to thrive together. Linda's voice grew heavier. We were naive. The Velcari taught us that some species see kindness as weakness. Some species interpret peace as submission. Some species will never respond to diplomacy because they believe only in power. She pulled up images on the display behind her. New Eden before and after. The smiling colonists and the burned ruins. The playgrounds and the ashes. 2,300,000 people died because we believed in the good nature of others. Children died. Families were erased. An entire world was murdered because we trusted too much. Linda let the images speak for themselves for a long moment. So let me be clear about humanity's position going forward. We will never fire first. We will always seek diplomatic solutions. We will continue to believe in cooperation and mutual benefit. We will extend our hand in friendship to any species that wants peace. Her voice grew cold. But if any species ever again mistakes our civility for weakness, they will discover what the Velcari discovered. We have weapons that can unmake stars. We have the will to use them. And we will never again allow the murder of our people to go unanswered. She gathered her notes. We have returned to civility. But civility is now a choice we make, not a constraint we accept. We choose to be kind. We choose to be peaceful. We choose to cooperate with our neighbors. Linda looked around the chamber one final time. Do not make us choose differently. The assembly was silent as she walked out. No one clapped. No one spoke. They simply watched this small human woman leave. And they remembered what her species had done when pushed too far. Admiral Patricia Cole retired 3 weeks after the war ended. She could not bear the medals they wanted to give her, could not stomach being called a hero. She had done what was necessary, but the weight of it pressed down on her every day. She bought a small house on a quiet colony world and tried to find peace. She planted a garden and read old books and avoided the news broadcasts that still discussed the war. Sometimes she slept without nightmares. Sometimes she didn't single quotes T. Amy Hart visited her once, a year after the war. They sat on the porch as the sun set. Now they're speaking for a long time. Do you regret it? Amy finally asked. Patricia thought about the question carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the Velcari gave us no other choice. I regret that I had to become someone I never wanted to be. She looked at the sunset, colors painting the sky in shades of orange and red. But I don't regret protecting humanity. I don't regret showing the galaxy that our children's lives have value. I don't regret making sure that no species will ever again think they can slaughter us without consequences. Captain Greg Palmer transferred to a diplomatic protection detail after the war. He couldn't command a warship anymore, couldn't sit in that chair and remember what he had done. But he still believed in protecting people. So he found a different way to serve. He guarded ambassadors now, keeping them safe as they traveled to distant worlds and tried to rebuild the trust that the war had shattered. It was quieter work, less exciting, but it felt cleaner somehow. The weapons were returned to their vaults beneath the mountains of Colorado. Dr. Nathan Price oversaw the process personally, making sure every warhead was accounted for, every drone was deactivated, every terrible creation was locked away in the darkness. I hope we never need them again, he said to the empty vault. But he didn't destroy them. None of the human leaders even suggested it. The galaxy had shown them what happened to species that could not defend themselves, and they would never forget that lesson. Humanity resumed its role as the optimists of the galaxy. Human diplomats traveled to distant worlds, smiling and offering friendship. Human scientists shared their discoveries freely. Human merchants traded fairly and complained about unfair tariffs. Human tourists marveled at alien architecture and tried strange foods and bought souvenirs for their families. From the outside, nothing had changed. But everyone who dealt with humans noticed something different now. A shadow behind the smiles. A weighty behind the kind words. An awareness that the friendly people across the negotiating table had weapons that could erase civilizations from existence. The 11 species freed from Velcari domination sent representatives to Earth, seeking alliance with the humans who had liberated them. They wanted protection, wanted to stand in the shadow of the species that had destroyed their oppressors. Ambassador Shaw met with them all, accepting their friendship while gently refusing their worship. We're not your saviors, she told them. We're not your masters. We're just your neighbors. We want to live in peace with you, to trade with you, to learn from you and share what we know. She smiled, and they saw something ancient and dangerous behind her kind eyes. Just don't ever give us a reason to become something else. Years passed. The memory of the war faded from the headlines, but never from the collective consciousness of the galaxy. New species joined the Galactic Assembly, and their elders told them about humanity, about the friendly people who smiled and offered cooperation, about the terrible weapons that slept beneath their mountains, about the massacre of New Eden and the destruction that followed. Be kind to the humans, the elders always said. They will be kind in return. But never, ever make them angry, because they remember what they are capable of, and they will do it again if they must. Humanity had learned a terrible lesson about itself. The galaxy had learned it too. Some species were peaceful because they had no choice. They lacked the strength or the will or the weapons to be anything else. Humanity was peaceful because they chose to be, because they genuinely believed in the better nature of sentient beings, because they wanted to build a galaxy where all species could thrive together, but they could always choose differently, and the galaxy would never forget it. The quantum disruption field expanded outward from the Nightfall in a sphere of absolute destruction. It moved faster than light, faster than thought, faster than the Velcari commanders could process what they were seeing. 200 warships caught in the initial blast simply ceased to exist. They did not explode. They did not burn. They were unmade at the atomic level. Every particle scattered into quantum foam. One moment, 200 ships filled with thousands of Velcari warriors hung in space, their weapons pointed at the lone human vessel. The next moment, there was nothing but empty darkness. The remaining 600 ships broke formation, their commanders screaming orders that nobody could follow. They had trained for every kind of battle imaginable. They had developed tactics for fighting enemies with superior numbers, superior technology, superior strategy. Nothing in their training had prepared them for weapons that simply erased matter from existence. Captain Greg Palmer watched the chaos on his tactical display. His face showed no satisfaction, no triumph, only grim determination. "Target their command ships," he ordered. "Leave their homeworld alone. We want witnesses." The Nightfall moved through the Velcari fleet like death itself, its weapons reaching out to touch ship after ship. The quantum disruption bursts were smaller now, precise surgical strikes that eliminated specific targets while leaving others untouched. Within 30 minutes, the greatest fleet the Velcari had ever assembled was reduced to scattered, survivors fleeing in every direction. On the Velcari homeworld, billions watched the battle in stunned silence. They had gathered in public squares and private homes, expecting to witness the destruction of the human invader. Instead, they watched their invincible navy dissolve like morning mist. The Supreme Matriarch stood in her war room, surrounded by advisors who had no advice to give. Her compound eyes reflected the tactical displays, showing the systematic dismantling of everything her species had built. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "They were supposed to be weak. They signed peace accords. They limited their military. They talked about cooperation and friendship." "They lied," one of her advisors said, his voice hollow with shock. No, the matriarch's voice was barely audible. They didn't lie. They genuinely wanted peace. They genuinely believed in cooperation. They simply also prepared for the possibility that others did not share their beliefs. Across Velcari space, the hidden hunter-killer drones activated simultaneously. They had been waiting in silence for weeks, embedded in asteroid fields and orbital debris and the dark spaces where no one thought to look. Now they emerged in swarms, millions upon millions of autonomous weapons executing their programming with perfect efficiency. Military installations that had taken centuries to build vanished in moments. Shipyards that produced the vessels of conquest became clouds of scattered atoms. Communication networks collapsed. Command structures disintegrated. The infrastructure of an interstellar empire, built over thousands of years, began to crumble in hours. Admiral Patricia Cole watched the destruction from the constellation, her flagship hanging at the edge of Velcari space. Lieutenant Commander Amy Hart stood beside her, the same officer who had walked through the ruins of New Eden and picked up a burned teddy bear. "They're requesting a ceasefire," Amy reported, her voice carefully neutral. "The Supreme Matriarch is willing to discuss terms of surrender." Patricia shook her head slowly. "They had their chance for surrender. We gave them 72 hours. They chose to mock us instead." "Admiral," Amy hesitated. "This isn't who we are. We don't do this. We don't slaughter our enemies after they ask for peace." "You're right." Patricia turned to face her young officer. "This isn't who we are. This isn't who we want to be. But the Velcari didn't attack us because we did something wrong. They attacked us because they thought they could. Because they looked at humanity and saw prey." She gestured at the tactical displays showing the systematic destruction of Velcari military assets. "Every species in this galaxy is watching right now. They watched New Eden burn and they took notes. Some of them were hoping the Velcari would succeed. Some of them were already making plans to do the same thing to our other colonies." Patricia's voice hardened. "We're not just fighting the Velcari. We're teaching the galaxy a lesson. We're showing every species that watched our children die exactly what the cost of attacking humanity will be. Not defeat. Not occupation. Absolute annihilation of everything that makes war possible. And what about their civilians? Amy asked. What about the billions of Velcari who had nothing to do with New Eden? We're not touching them. Patricia pulled up a detailed map showing the pattern of attacks. Look, every strike is targeting military infrastructure. Shipyards, weapons factories, command centers, military bases. We're destroying their ability to make war, not their ability to live. She met Amy's eyes. The Velcari would have exterminated us down to the last child. They said so themselves. We're choosing to be better than that. But we're also choosing to make sure they can never threaten us again. The destruction continued for 3 days. The Nightfall and its sister ships moved through Velcari space like surgeons removing a cancer, precise and methodical. They destroyed everything that could be used for war and left everything else untouched. When it was over, the Velcari Dominion still existed. Their homeworld was intact. Their civilian population was largely unharmed. Their cities still stood. Their farms still produced food. Their hospitals still treated the sick. But their military was gone. Their ability to project power beyond their own system was erased. The empire that had conquered 11 species and terrorized the galaxy for millennia was reduced to a single world. Dependent on the mercy of neighbors they had once dominated. Captain Palmer broadcast a final message before the human fleet withdrew. The Velcari Dominion is hereby dissolved. Your former subject species are now free. Any attempt to rebuild military capabilities will be met with immediate response. Any attempt to harm humans anywhere in the galaxy will result in consequences that make today look gentle. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was softer. We didn't want this. We never wanted this. But you gave us no choice. You killed our families and expected us to accept it. You thought our kindness meant we were incapable of cruelty. Greg Palmer looked at the image of the Velcari homeworld on his display. Now you know better. We hope you learn from this. We hope you find a way to live peacefully with your neighbors. Because the next time will be worse. The Nightfall vanished into fold space, leaving behind a shattered empire and a galaxy that would never see humanity the same way again.